Hi everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. In today's video, I'll be sharing how I developed the drawing for my latest mermaid piece. And if you haven't heard of Mermay before, it is when during the month of May, people will draw or paint mermaids. And I have been participating for the past 2 years now. So far I have 3 mermaid pieces under my belt. And so this is the latest addition to that little series. And yes, unfortunately, it is not May currently. We're now into June. That's how life goes sometimes. Hopefully the appeal of mermaids haven't worn off on people yet. So when I first sat down to come up with an idea for this piece, I didn't film it because that's when I feel like the most vulnerable, because I have no idea what I'm doing and I am just grasping at anything that kind of sparks an idea in me. And oftentimes the sketches that I do during this stage are crude, and I don't really like the feeling of someone like watching over my shoulder when I'm trying to come up with an idea. So that's why I didn't really film this very initial stage. But I did arrive at an idea where I thought I could take it further, and it's of the girl playing on her guitar. And since I liked that idea, I sketched it out a few times more on the next page. And then this is just kind of how my ideas tend to evolve. I usually arrive at like a pose that I want, and then I kind of build up from that point. So I had this pose of the girl playing on her guitar, and then I drew her on a rowboat. And then I liked the idea of a dog kind of howling and singing along with her. And that is how I arrived at the whole blues on the bayou kind of idea. Something else that I knew going into coming up with an idea for this piece was that I wanted it to not be an underwater mermaid scenario, because I had done that for the past 3 mermaid pieces. And since I knew I wanted it to be a vertical composition, I then started drawing out little boxes. And I like to draw little boxes to begin with because it is easier to draw in a much smaller format. You can see the entire picture, and it forces you to think in big shapes and big vectors, I guess, lines that you are manipulating to force your eyes toward the focal point, which is the mermaid. And it just really forces you to worry more about the composition and how these lines are leading to your focal point, and how the overall big shapes in the composition are laid out and how they're working off of each other, rather than getting too focused in the like specifics of what is in the picture. So I just start sketching and trying to figure out what kind of shapes are going to be in the other 4 corners of this rectangle, this box that I drew. I knew I wanted the girl, the boat, and the dog. And everything else just kind of, they can be manipulated to help support that idea. I first started out with the idea that this was going to be a sad, like bittersweet kind of blues song, and all the animals that are listening, they are all very moved by it. They are touched, they are crying, and I really like the idea of making a bittersweet kind of piece. And I was thinking of making the animals really exaggerated and stylized, and their tears are also very like graphic and big and bold. And I think initially I was thinking of a more abstract kind of piece, even though it doesn't look super abstract on paper. In my head, I had it kind of a more abstract and loose and more stylized piece than my typical kind of work that I've done, and certainly more like abstract and stylized than my past mermaid pieces. I think there's something really beautiful in kind of sad artwork, but even though I felt pretty strongly about making this into a somber kind of moody piece, I did decide to go the opposite direction and make it into an energetic, like happy, joyous kind of piece. Because I guess one of the big reasons why I decided to change it is I did wonder if I had gone with a very different direction for this piece, this mermaid piece, and it was so different from the past mermaid pieces, then would it not look like they're a part of the same series? And I'm quite fond of my mermaid series, and they are actually my most, I guess, commercially popular pieces. So a part of me wanted to keep it very cohesive, even though the artist in me wanted to do something totally different and make this into a more abstract, a more stylized type of piece rather than the more storybook-like illustrations that I have done in the past. So with that in mind, I drew it in the other direction, the happier, more energetic kind of direction, and to my surprise, I actually really like this direction as well. I guess my fears were that it would seem really cliched because we have all seen this type of idea before. A lot of us are already familiar with Disney's Princess and the Frog, which is set in New Orleans. And there's a whole musical number, this jazz blues musical number on the swamp, on the bayou. So it's definitely been done before, not just by Disney, but I'm sure a lot of other people. And so that's why I was initially hesitant in going this direction to begin with. But as I was drawing the new thumbnails with this new happier direction, I was really liking what I was seeing, and I felt like I could have a lot more fun with the animals actually participating and playing instruments. And I felt like compositionally, I was also having a lot more fun with it. I was having fun with stretching the line of action of the animals, playing the music. And because it is a lighter mood, I could see it being set in the daytime, which is what I wanted. So I put my foot down and decided that this was a direction that I wanted to take my piece into. Making decisions like this are kind of hard for me. I'm naturally just a very indecisive person, and over the years of having made many pictures, I've learned that there are just billions, trillions, there's an infinite amount of great ideas. But you can't just spend all your time trying to come up with the best idea. You just have to kind of run with it and make the best with what you've got. Otherwise, it's so easy to get very overwhelmed with all the different elements that are in the piece and wanting to make every little thing as perfect as it could be. I always put so much pressure on myself with each piece that I embark on, because I feel like this is the only chance that I have to do justice on this piece. And that is just so not a healthy way to look at things, because what is stopping me from trying this idea out again? If I'm really passionate about an idea, why can't I try it out a couple of times? Why do I have to get it perfectly right and to my vision in one go? Every time I embark on a new piece, I feel like I have to get it right in that one try, and somehow redoing it is shameful, or at the very least redundant. So as you can imagine, I put a lot of pressure on myself to do my best on each piece, and this is kind of why I do a lot of planning and exploration work. Actually, this is funny because I personally think that I don't do enough, but I often get comments on Instagram and on YouTube saying that I do a lot. I do a lot more than most. A lot of people have said that they just draw and then paint all in one go, and that's their piece. Whereas I do little exploration sketches, and I do the thumbnails, and I do more thumbnails, and then I do value comps and color comps and It's this whole big thing, and it takes me weeks to get through to finish one painting. But I didn't do a whole lot of, actually, I don't really do any kind of like explorational, like design kind of work, because that would take forever if I wanted to create a unique design for every little animal in the piece. The purpose is really to convey the idea that there's this fun like blues/jazz act on the bayou, and it's not really about how like, oh, look how unique the design of this alligator is. And I guess all that is to say is that I wish I had spent more time exploring every little element, but at the same time, I have to make a decision. I have to move on and just work with what I've got and try to make the best piece I can out of that. So here I was trying to nail down the feeling and the kind of look that I wanted for the girl, but more focused, I guess, on her expression and her pose. And it doesn't look very different to you guys. The differences are very, very subtle, and nothing on this page I feel like got very close to what I wanted. But all of these iterations, even though they are unsuccessful, they all help me arrive at the final, which hopefully is like the closest to what I had envisioned in my head. I really want her face to have this upturned and then like tilted kind of look. So we're looking up at her and then her face is tilted away from us. I just thought that would look really emotive. By the way, I didn't really get a chance to mention this earlier, but this piece was very inspired by my trip to New Orleans earlier this year. It was my first time visiting New Orleans, and I was only there for, I think, 5 days, but it made a really big impression on me visually and viscerally, and it was the furthest south I've ever been in the States, and it was a really different kind of vibe. And something else that really caught my eye were these old school gas lanterns that look like they're from the 1800s that are just lit outside of people's homes. And they just gave the houses such a cool vibe, and it was so unique to me. It felt very different to me. And of course, the live music that I guess is the main inspiration for this piece. It really is true. Like, there is just an abundance of live music just happening in the French Quarter. Just every which corner you take, there's a live like jazz band. With this very lively music and surrounded by this very unique architecture that is very different to me and what I know, it all really left a big impression on me. And I feel like with this piece, I'm desperately going to try to draw from that experience that I had in New Orleans. Even though I didn't go out of the city, I wasn't able, unfortunately, to take the Bayou tour or anything like that. The air alone that I felt while I was there, it felt different from what I used to in Canada. It felt, first of all, the time that I went, it was in February, so it wasn't hot yet, and it felt there was like a crispness to the air, and I guess the air there is very humid, so it just feels different. I can't even explain it, but somehow I want to capture that feeling into my piece. And also all the colors that I saw that were, I guess, different to me. It was very green And there were I remember seeing a lot of like magentas and purple, I guess because by that time people were decorating for Mardi Gras. And yeah, just these little nuggets of information that I've now banked in my visual library that I can draw and pull from for this piece. Even though it's not about being on the streets of New Orleans, the feeling of being on the streets of New Orleans is what I've tapped into for the idea of this piece. Long story short, I went out there, I lived, I experienced, and I want to tap into that experience, and I want to bring it onto paper for you guys to hopefully feel some of that yourselves. So on this page, I was trying to figure out what kind of animals I wanted in the piece. I just Googled Louisiana swamp animals, and apparently there are raccoons, so I drew a raccoon, and of course there are alligators, and wild pigs apparently, and the brown pelican, and apparently these like giant rat-like rodents called nutria, and apparently they're like invasive species to Louisiana, but I thought because they are numerous there, maybe I shall include one. And by that point, I felt ready to blow up the thumbnail and really flesh out the composition on a bigger scale. And usually I actually do this step on Photoshop because it's a lot easier to move things around. But I really wanted to go as far as I could with pencil and paper because I wanted the piece to have as much kind of that rustic, sketchy vibe as much as possible, because I want the piece to look loose in the end. I don't want it to look too tight. I feel like with my past few works, they have been really, really tight, and I wanted to loosen up with this one. So I painstakingly drew everything out again, but this time it was a little bit harder because now I'm really trying to place all the elements where they should go, trying to avoid tangents and trying to place the elements in a way where things feel balanced visually. I wanted the picture to look very filled out and cluttered, but not so cluttered that there wouldn't be enough negative space of the water, because that's something I really wanted to play around with. So that's something I had to keep in mind. And in the end, I do end up cutting a few things out that I drew in this composition, mainly the little dancing alligator in the background, which is a shame because I feel like the dancing alligator is so fun, but I had a decision to make. It felt a little bit cluttered in the back, and it clashed with the raccoon bashing trash can lids together, and I wanted to be able to also put a little bit of the like environmental elements in there as well, and it just looked a little bit too cluttered in that corner, so sadly had to edit him out. I can only work on a composition for so long until I feel like I just have to get started on the darn thing and figure things out from there. I actually had an idea for a swamp painting a number of years ago that sort of inspired this piece as well. I endearingly call my boyfriend a swamp creature, and so the picture was about him with like a boot on his head, and he's down, like he's a swamp creature, so he's like living in the swamp, and he's like looking up underneath a lily pad or something, and then he's looking at me adoringly, who is the swamp queen, I guess. I wish I had the sketch that I did for that idea to show you guys. But yeah, this piece, the humor of this piece, I guess, was partly inspired from that. Because the idea that these like kind of down on their luck swamp creatures are just living their best life. They don't care if they've got a banana peel on their head or an empty like tomato soup can on their head. They're all just living their best lives. To me, I had a lot of fun drawing out the little animals and their particular scenarios. I find animals really charming, and I love, as you guys might have noticed, I really love incorporating animals into my work, even though my knowledge of animal anatomy could use a lot of work. I just find the innocence of animals really funny and charming. So I was trying to incorporate as much of it as possible into a single picture. I know there's a lot going on. Initially, I told myself, oh, this is going to be a simpler piece than my last piece, Happy Mess. But I don't think that is the case. I think there's definitely a lot more going on in this one. And because there are a lot of elements in this piece, I decided to paint it on a much larger scale, which I might end up regretting later. But I picked up what I consider a giant watercolor block. It is the Arches 14 by 20 inches cold press watercolor block. And actually, I picked up the cold press this time because I miss using cold press, and I actually typically use hot press for watercolor and cold press more for gouache, but I wanted to just give it a go this time and see how it goes. The cold press paper, I find it allows for more like water and more, it can take a lot more than a hot press paper would. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. I am nervous about filming it because the bigger like the block is, the harder it will be for me to film it in its entirety. So I'm not looking forward to filming it, but hopefully it won't be so difficult to use because I would have to like extend my arm so far to get up to like the top area of the piece without having my head like obscure the view of the camera. Yeah, it's gonna be a challenge, but one that I signed up for and am looking forward to tackling. So by this point, I felt ready to bring this into Photoshop and finalize the drawing and like move things around a little bit so that it is more to the proportion, like the 14 by 20 proportion that I want. And many hours later, this is the final drawing that I will be using to bring to life. So that is it for today's video. I will be sharing how I come up with the colors for the piece, and I will be bringing the piece to completion in my next video. So please stay tuned for that. I want to thank you guys for watching, and I also want to thank my dear patrons for making this video possible. Their support helps me allocate more time into making videos for everyone. So if you like what I do here and you would like for me to keep making these kinds of videos, please consider becoming a patron. With that, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you guys in part 2 in my next video. So, bye!